Under the pale winter sky, a quiet town was waking up slowly. The streets were empty, covered with thin layers of frost, and most people were still indoors, sitting close to their heaters or fireplaces. It was the kind of morning when no one wanted to step outside because the cold seemed to bite through even the thickest coats. Yet on that freezing day, something happened that the town would never forget. 3 tiny babies, only hours old, were left at the back door of the small hospital. They were wrapped in thin pieces of cloth, barely enough to protect them from the harsh cold. Their little hands trembled and their weak cries cut through the silence of dawn. No one knew who left them there. No note, no explanation, no sign of their parents, just 3 helpless newborns struggling to breathe in the bitter air. The hospital's night nurse, who was finishing her shift, stepped outside to throw away some trash. At first, she thought she heard a cat meowing, but when she looked closer, she saw a bundle on the ground moving slightly. Her heart skipped a beat. When she pulled back the cloth, she froze. Not 1 baby, but 3. Triplets. Her hands shook as she scooped them up, trying to keep them warm against her chest. They were so small, so fragile, their faces red from crying. For a moment, she felt tears rise in her eyes. Who could do such a thing? Who would abandon 3 innocent souls like this? She rushed them inside, calling for help. Doctors and nurses came running, shocked at what they saw. Immediately, they worked together to warm the babies, wrapping them in soft blankets and checking their tiny bodies. The triplets were weak but alive. Their cries slowly softened as warmth returned to their little limbs. Everyone in the hospital gathered around, unable to hide their astonishment. It was rare enough to see triplets born in such a small town. To see them abandoned on the same day of their birth was something that left the whole staff speechless. Word spread quickly. By noon, the entire town was buzzing with the story. People whispered in markets and tea shops and on the streets. 3 babies left outside the hospital. Triplets, can you believe it? Some were angry, others were heartbroken, and some were simply curious. But everyone agreed on one thing. These children had been given a cruel start in life. They didn't even have names. Inside the hospital, the staff debated what to do next. But one thing was certain, they couldn't let the babies suffer. The nurse who had found them sat close, rocking them gently, whispering soft words of comfort. It was almost as if she had already become a mother figure in that moment. Each baby had something special about them. One had a small birthmark near the eye. Another had unusually bright eyes that seemed to shine even though they could barely focus. And the third had a soft curl of hair that stuck out no matter how often it was smoothed down. As hours passed, the town's curiosity grew. Some people came to the hospital, peeking through the glass, eager to catch a glimpse of the abandoned triplets. They called them the Charming 3, because even in their tiny state, wrapped in borrowed blankets, they looked angelic. Their story touched everyone's heart. Many couldn't stop wondering what kind of mother or father would walk away from 3 children at once. Was it poverty? Fear? Shame? No one had answers. For the babies, however, the questions didn't matter. All they knew was warmth when held, hunger when they cried, and comfort when someone rocked them. Their first day in the world had already been a fight for survival. Yet against the freezing morning they had lived. And that small miracle gave hope to those who saw them. That night when the town fell quiet again, the triplets slept peacefully inside the hospital nursery. The same nurse who had saved them looked at them through the glass window, her heart heavy yet filled with a strange kind of joy. She whispered to herself, maybe they were left here for a reason. Maybe they are meant for something greater. And so, under the watchful eyes of strangers, the 3 abandoned babies began their story. They had no parents to claim them, no names to call their own, no family to protect them. But they had life. They had each other. And they had the beginning of a journey that would one day astonish everyone who remembered that cold morning, when 3 tiny voices first cried out in the dark. The hospital staff knew the babies could not stay there forever. Newborns needed constant care, and the small-town hospital was not equipped to raise 3 infants day and night. After making sure they were healthy and stable, the local authorities were informed. Very soon, the town's orphanage agreed to take them in. The orphanage was an old brick building on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy. The paint on the walls was peeling, the playground was worn down, and the bedrooms were filled with simple iron beds lined up in rows. But it was a place where abandoned children at least had food, shelter, and someone to watch over them. And now, it would become the first true home of the triplets. When the 3 tiny babies arrived, The other children at the orphanage crowded around, their eyes wide with curiosity. Many of them had been abandoned too, left behind for their own reasons. They whispered excitedly, calling them the three little angels. For a while, the triplets became the center of attention. The staff gave them small cribs side by side, so they would always be close to each other. They were given soft clothes donated by kind townspeople and bottles of warm milk to drink. But there was one big question. What would they be called? Names give identity, and these babies deserved one. After much discussion, the staff decided to give them simple, gentle names that reflected hope. The nurse who had found them insisted on being part of that choice. She said, "If they were left at our door, then we are now their first family. Their names should carry love," and so the three charming triplets finally had names. They were no longer just the abandoned babies. They became children with identities ready to begin their uncertain journey. Raising them was not easy. Babies cry and triplets cry even louder. Many nights the orphanage was filled with their restless wails. The workers often took turns rocking them, feeding them, and comforting them until they slept again. Some nights the nurse from the hospital would visit just to check on them. She never admitted it, but deep inside she felt tied to these children, as though fate had chosen her to be their guardian. As months passed, the triplets grew stronger. They learned to crawl together, often chasing each other around the orphanage floor. If one fell, the other two would come close, touching gently, as though reminding each other that they were never alone. Their bond was something the staff often marveled at. Unlike other children who fought over toys, the triplets seemed to share naturally. One would giggle and the others would follow. One would cry and the others would look worried. They were connected in ways that went beyond words. Still, life in an orphanage had its shadows. The building was crowded, and there was never enough food or clothes for all the children. Sometimes the staff grew tired and snapped in frustration. The older kids teased the younger ones, and the triplets, though charming, were not spared. They were often reminded by others that they had been left behind and had no family. Words like those left invisible scars, even if they couldn't fully understand them yet. But whenever things grew tough, they had each other. At night, they would sleep close together in their cribs, tiny hands reaching out, holding on to one another as if promising silently, "We won't let go. We will survive no matter what." The years went by slowly. The orphanage became their world, walls filled with laughter, tears, fights, and small joys. They learned to walk in those hallways, learned their first words in those crowded rooms, and took their first steps in the playground with its rusty swings. To the outside world, they were the abandoned triplets, but inside the orphanage, they became a symbol of hope. Staff members would often point to them and tell new arrivals, "Look at them. They were left with nothing, but they are still smiling. If they can do it, so can you." What made their presence unique was not just that they were triplets, but that they carried a special charm that warmed hearts. They were living proof that even after a cold and cruel beginning, life could still grow with warmth if someone gave it a chance. People from the town would sometimes visit, bringing toys or clothes just to see them. It was rare for outsiders to pay such attention to the orphanage, but the story of the three babies found on a freezing morning had touched too many hearts to be forgotten. And yet, despite all the care and occasional kindness, the triplets always carried a silent emptiness. At night, when other children spoke about their parents, whether lost, poor, or gone, the triplets had no stories to tell. They had no memories of a mother's face or a father's voice. All they had was each other, and for them that had to be enough. But deep inside, even as small children, they often wondered, why were we left? Who were we before we came here? The answers never came, and the questions only grew as they got older. Still, despite the shadows, their bond gave them strength. From the day they entered the orphanage side by side, the world began to see them as more than abandoned children. They were survivors. Survivors who carried with them a strange and unexplainable charm, something that would one day make their story unforgettable. As the triplets grew older, the world around them grew harder. Childhood inside the orphanage was not the same as childhood in a family home. Other children their age had parents waiting for them after school, warm meals made with love, and stories read at bedtime. The triplets, however, only had each other and the crowded walls of the orphanage. By the time they turned 6, they were old enough to notice differences. At school, they sat at the same desk, 3 little faces side by side. Some children were curious about them, amazed that they were triplets. but others were cruel. Whispered words like the abandoned ones followed them in the playground. It didn't matter how bright their smiles were or how charming their presence felt. Children could be harsh without knowing the weight of their words. The triplets never fought back with anger. Instead, they drew closer together. If one of them was teased, the other two would stand beside, silently protecting. If one of them cried, the others would offer comfort. The bond they shared was like an invisible shield, keeping them strong even when the world tried to break them down. Life at the orphanage wasn't easy either. Resources were limited. Sometimes meals were thin, watery soup, stale bread, or rice with little flavor. Clothes were passed down from one child to another until they no longer fit. Toys were rare and often broken, but even in this environment, the triplets found ways to create joy. They made games out of scraps, shared secret jokes, and invented small worlds of imagination where they could escape the reality of being unwanted children. Still, there were nights when the emptiness was too much. They would lie awake in their small beds, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sobs of other orphans who missed parents they once knew. The triplets had no such memories. They did not know what a mother's hug felt like or how a father's voice sounded. They only knew they had been left behind. That mystery was both a wound and a shield. It hurt to imagine why they were abandoned, but at the same time they told themselves, maybe it wasn't our fault. Maybe it was destiny. As they grew older, each triplet began to show a glimpse of individuality. One had a natural talent for music. With only a broken keyboard found in storage, he would press the keys for hours, creating soft melodies that filled the air with unexpected beauty. The second discovered a love for sports, always running faster than the others, always jumping higher as though trying to escape gravity itself. The third had a quiet gift for drawing. With scraps of paper and dull pencils, she sketched faces, houses, and dreams of a life outside the orphanage walls. Their talents brought them small recognition in school, but even that came with struggles. They lacked resources. The musician had no proper instrument, the athlete had no good shoes, and the artist had no real supplies. Teachers admired their natural gifts but often sighed, knowing the orphanage couldn't give them what they needed to truly shine. The triplets, however, refused to give up. They didn't know the luxury of choice. Survival had taught them persistence. The musician kept practicing on broken instruments, the athlete trained barefoot on rough ground, and the artist continued sketching with whatever she could find. Their determination became a silent rebellion against the fate they were handed. Despite their charm and talents, one painful truth followed them everywhere. They were rarely chosen for adoption. Families would visit the orphanage, looking for a child to take home. Some wanted a baby, others wanted just one child, not three. The triplets, however, could not be separated. Whenever adoption was discussed, they clung tightly to each other, their little hands refusing to let go. "We stay together," they would say. Their bond was too strong to break, and because of this, families often walked away, unwilling to take all three. That rejection cut deep. It reminded them that the world outside didn't always value their bond. But instead of tearing them apart, it made them stronger. They promised each other silently, "If no one chooses us, we will choose each other." Always. By their early teens, life became even more challenging. The orphanage expected them to help with chores, cleaning, cooking, even repairing things when they broke. They studied hard at school during the day, but evenings were often filled with responsibility. Sometimes exhaustion pulled at them, but they rarely complained. They had learned early on that complaining didn't change reality. Only effort did. Still, the questions of their past never left. Who were their parents? Why had they been abandoned together? Was it poverty, shame, or something darker? Each triplet carried those questions silently, never saying them aloud, but each wondered the same at night. The mystery haunted them, shaping their thoughts and dreams, yet in all these struggles they remained united. They were laughed at, rejected, and sometimes forgotten, but their love for each other never weakened. They were more than siblings, they were survivors holding hands against the storm. Their lives were proof that even in the harshest places, bonds of love could grow strong enough to keep hope alive. And though they didn't know it then, every struggle, every scar, and every rejection was shaping them for something greater. Their story was still only beginning. As the triplets stepped deeper into their teenage years, something began to change inside them. Life had never been easy, but hardship had a strange way of shaping hidden strengths. While most children at the orphanage blended into the crowd, These three began to stand out, not because of how they looked, but because of the quiet sparks of talent that began to glow in each of them. It started with the oldest of the three, the one who had always been drawn to sound. Even as a child, he would hum to himself when he was scared, and somehow his siblings would calm down just by hearing his soft tune. One day, while helping to clean the storeroom at the orphanage, he discovered an old guitar with a broken string. Most people would have thrown it away, but he held it carefully, almost reverently, as though he had found a treasure. That night he sat in the corner, plucking the remaining strings until they made a rough melody. It wasn't perfect, but it was music, and from that moment, he was no longer just another orphan. He was a boy with music in his soul. The second triplet was restless, full of energy that could never be contained by walls. He loved to run, and whenever there was an open field, he would dash across it as if his legs were wings. The other children laughed, but they also admired how fast he was. He could outrun anyone, leaping over rocks and fences with ease. At school, teachers noticed his speed and encouraged him to join sports. Even though he had no proper shoes and no training, he raced with such determination that people stopped to watch. Every step he took felt like defiance, like he was telling the world, "You left me behind, but look how far I can go." The youngest triplet was different. She was quiet, often lost in her own world. While others played outside, she sat with scraps of paper and dull pencils, sketching. Her drawings were not ordinary. She captured faces with expressions so real, it felt as if the paper itself was alive. When she drew a house, it wasn't just bricks and windows. It was a home filled with warmth, something she longed for but never had. The other children would crowd around her, amazed that her hands could turn plain paper into something so beautiful. For her, drawing was not just a hobby. It was her way of speaking when words were too heavy to say aloud. Their talents grew quietly, like hidden seeds breaking through hard soil. At first they seemed small, but soon the staff and even the townspeople began to notice. During school events, the musician played simple songs that left audiences in awe. The athlete won small races, his bare feet slapping the ground faster than boys with expensive shoes. The artist's sketches were pinned on classroom walls, admired for their detail and emotion. But talent alone did not erase their struggles. The musician had no real instrument to practice with. The athlete had no coach to guide him, and the artist had no paints or brushes to expand her gift. They had passion but lacked resources. Many nights they would sit together under the dim orphanage light, sharing their dreams. One would strum the broken guitar, another would talk about running in big stadiums, and the third would show her sketches. They promised each other, "One day we will rise above this. One day the world will see us not as abandoned children but as something more." Their bond made them unstoppable. If the musician felt discouraged, the other two reminded him of the songs that soothed their childhood fears. If the athlete wanted to give up, his siblings would cheer him on, racing with him barefoot in the dusty yard. If the artist doubted herself, her brothers would hold up her sketches and say, "Look, this is more than just drawing. This is your voice." The orphanage staff, though burdened with too many children, could not ignore the glow of the triplets. Some teachers donated old music sheets. A kind coach gave the athlete secondhand sneakers. An art teacher handed down a set of watercolors to the young artist. Small gifts, but to the triplets they felt like miracles. Slowly, the three began to stand out, not just within the orphanage, but beyond. People in town started whispering again, just like they had on the day the babies were found. "Have you seen the abandoned triplets? They are growing into something special." Of course, not everyone was supportive. Some said it didn't matter how talented they were. They were still orphans, still children without a family name. Those words cut deep. But instead of breaking them, the triplets used the pain as fuel. They poured their feelings into their crafts. The musician's songs carried sorrow and hope. The athlete's running carried defiance, and the artist's paintings carried silent longing. What no one realized then was that these talents were not just hobbies. They were survival tools. They were the triplets' way of pushing back against the cruel hand life had dealt them. With every song, every race, every sketch, they were rewriting their story. And even though they didn't yet know where their paths would lead, one thing was clear: the charming triplets, once left to die in the cold, were beginning to shine. Their talents were their light, guiding them toward a future no one could have imagined. Time passed quickly, and before the triplets realized it, childhood slipped away. The orphanage, which had been their only world, was no longer a place they could stay forever. By the time they turned 18, the rules were clear. They had to step out into the world on their own. For most, turning 18 meant freedom. But for the triplets, it felt like being pushed out of a shelter into a storm. On the day they left, the staff hugged them and gave small bundles of clothes, a few coins and kind but worried words. Stay together. Look after each other. It wasn't much, but it was all the orphanage could offer. With no family to welcome them and no home to return to, they walked out with trembling hearts. The world beyond the walls was wide, unfamiliar, and often cruel. At first, they tried to survive with small jobs. The musician played on street corners, strumming the same old broken guitar that had carried him through his teenage years. People stopped to listen. Some even dropped coins into his open case, but most walked by without a glance. The athlete took jobs carrying heavy loads, running errands, doing physical work. His strength earned him a little money, but his dream of running on real track seemed far away. The artist sketched portraits in markets, offering to draw people for a few coins. Some admired her work, but many bargained her down until the payment felt more like charity than respect. Nights were the hardest. They rented a tiny single room with walls that leaked rain and a floor so cold it made their bones ache. Sometimes, when they couldn't afford rent, they slept outside, huddled together under thin blankets. They ate whatever they could afford, often just bread, soup, or nothing at all. Hunger was no stranger to them. Still, they shared everything equally, just as they had since childhood. The harshness of the world weighed on them quickly. People judged them for being orphans, for not having a family name, for being nobodies. Employers rejected them. Landlords treated them with suspicion, and strangers looked at them with pity or distrust. It was a reminder that society often shut doors on those who had been abandoned. Yet even in this struggle, their bond never weakened. When the musician's hands hurt from playing too long, his siblings massaged them gently. When the athlete's back ached from carrying heavy loads, his brother and sister reminded him of his strength. When the artist felt tears well up because no one valued her sketches, her brothers told her, "The world just isn't ready for your gift yet." Still, doubt often crept in. Some nights, sitting together in the dark, they wondered if they would ever escape the cycle of poverty. They questioned whether their dreams were too big for orphans like them. "What if this is all we will ever be?" one whispered. The silence after such words was heavy, but then, one of them would always break it with determination. "No, we didn't survive all this just to give up now." Their talents, which had once been their escape in the orphanage, became their tools of survival. The musician slowly gained regular spots in small cafes, where his soulful songs touched strangers' hearts. The athlete joined local competitions, running barefoot at first until he saved enough to buy second-hand shoes. The artist began painting larger works, selling them in markets where at least a few people recognized her gift. These were not big successes, but they were small steps forward. Even so, the world tested them again and again. Sometimes days passed without enough food. Sometimes they were cheated by those who saw their desperation. Sometimes they sat in silence, too tired to even speak. But every time life pushed them down, they leaned on each other, just as they had since the day they were found at the hospital door. What kept them going was not just survival, but the quiet belief that destiny had more in store for them. They carried their scars, their hunger, their rejection, but also their resilience. They told themselves that being abandoned did not define their future. The world had left them once, but they would not leave each other. One evening, as they sat by the side of the road counting the few coins they had earned that day, a thought struck them. They looked at each other and realized, we are not weak. We are not broken. We are still here. That simple truth gave them strength. In a world that had every reason to forget them, they refused to disappear. The harsh outside world had taken their comfort, but it could not take their bond. And slowly, step by step, the triplets began to transform their pain into power. What none of them knew then was that their struggles were preparing them for something greater. The cold streets, the long nights, the endless hunger, these were not the end of their story. They were only the beginning of a chapter that would one day shock everyone who thought abandoned children could never rise. Life on the outside had been harsh, but fate often works in ways no one expects. For the triplets, help arrived when they least imagined it, on a day that seemed like any other. The musician was sitting at the corner of a busy street, his guitar worn down to its last threads of strength. His fingers moved across the strings, playing a tune filled with sorrow and hope. People walked past, some pausing for a moment, others ignoring him completely. His siblings stood nearby, tired from their day of labor, but quietly humming along, as if the music was a comfort against the cold air. Among the crowd that day was an elderly couple. They stopped not just because of the music, but because of the faces of the three young people. Something about their bond, their closeness, struck the couple deeply. The man listened to the song until the last note faded, and then he asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" The musician lowered his eyes, unsure how to answer. "I just taught myself," he said softly. The couple exchanged a glance, one filled with curiosity and quiet compassion. That single moment changed everything. The couple began to visit them often, buying food, bringing warm clothes, and asking about their lives. Slowly, the triplets opened up, telling them pieces of their story, about the orphanage, about being abandoned, about struggling to survive. Instead of pity, the couple offered kindness. They never looked at the triplets as the abandoned ones. They saw them as young souls who deserved a chance. One cold evening, after weeks of watching them suffer, the couple made a decision. "Come stay with us," the woman said. "You need a roof and you need rest. You've carried the weight of the world for too long." The triplets hesitated. They had learned not to trust easily. Too many times promises had been made and broken. But something about the couple's eyes, the warmth, the sincerity, made them believe. And so, for the first time since leaving the orphanage, they entered a real home. The couple's house was small but filled with love. There were warm blankets, proper meals, and most importantly, no judgment. For the triplets, even something as simple as sitting at a table together felt like a miracle. They hadn't eaten a proper dinner in months, yet here they were, tasting food made with care, not charity. The helping hand extended by the couple did more than provide shelter. It gave the triplets the space to breathe, to dream again. The musician finally had time to practice without worrying about hunger. The athlete began training in local parks, running with more discipline. The artist found new inspiration, sketching the warmth of the home they were given, capturing what family felt like on paper for the first time. The couple encouraged them constantly. "Your talents are not accidents," the old man told them. "They are gifts. The world tried to bury you, but gifts like yours cannot be hidden forever." These words stayed with the triplets, fueling their determination. Yet it wasn't just material help that mattered. It was the feeling of being seen, of being valued. For years they had lived with labels: orphans, abandoned, unwanted. But in that house they were simply children with dreams. The woman would often say, "Don't let the world define you, define yourselves." Little by little, the kindness of two strangers began to heal wounds that years of struggle had left behind. The triplets laughed more, slept better, and found courage to keep chasing their goals. It was as if the storm of their lives had finally given way to a patch of sunlight. But life was not suddenly easy. There were still challenges. Money was. Short opportunities were rare, and the triplets had a long way to go before their dreams could truly take flight. Still, the difference was clear. They no longer faced the battle alone. The world outside remained harsh, but inside that little home, they discovered something they had never truly felt before: hope rooted in love. Looking back, they realized that survival had kept them alive, but kindness was what gave them life again. The helping hand of that couple didn't just offer shelter, it gave them a new direction. For the first time, the triplets believed that maybe, just maybe, their story could change. And what they didn't yet know was that this kindness would become the foundation for the transformation that was waiting ahead, one that would astonish everyone who once doubted them. Time has a way of changing everything, especially when seeds of kindness are planted in the right soil. For the triplets, the day they stepped into the elderly couple's home was the day their lives truly began to transform. It wasn't an instant miracle. There were no riches, no sudden fame, but it was the beginning of steady growth, the kind that comes from love, encouragement, and hard work. The musician was the first to show signs of change. With the couple's support, he was able to buy his very first proper guitar. The moment he held it, his hands trembled and tears filled his eyes. Gone were the broken strings. Gone was the cheap wood. This was an instrument that could finally match the music inside him. Night after night he practiced, his voice blending with the gentle strumming until the house itself seemed to sing. Soon, small cafes invited him to play, and little by little, he began to earn respect. People who once walked past him on the street now stopped to listen, their hearts moved by songs that carried both pain and hope. The athlete, too, began to rise. He had always been fast, but now, with proper shoes and the encouragement of a local coach introduced by the couple, his talent soared. He trained daily, running laps in the early morning mist, sweat rolling down his face, determination burning in his eyes. At first, he competed in local races. Then, as his name spread, he was invited to regional competitions. The boy who once ran barefoot in orphanage yards now ran in front of cheering crowds. Each victory was not just his own. It was proof that destiny could not chain him down. The artist bloomed quietly, but her growth was perhaps the most surprising. With real paints, brushes, and canvases gifted to her, she poured her soul into every stroke. She painted not just what she saw, but what she felt. The loneliness of the orphanage, the bond of her siblings, the kindness of strangers, and the fragile beauty of hope. Her paintings carried emotions that words could never express. Local galleries soon noticed her talent, inviting her to display her work. People stared at her art, often leaving in silence, touched in ways they couldn't explain. Transformation did not mean the triplets forgot their struggles. They still remembered nights of hunger, days of rejection, and the sting of being called abandoned. But instead of breaking them, those memories became the fuel behind their success. Every note played, every step run, every painting finished carried the echo of survival. They weren't just creating art, music, or records, they were creating proof that life could grow even from the coldest beginnings. The couple who had taken them in watched with pride. Their small home, once quiet, was now filled with laughter, music, sketches, and dreams taking flight. The old man often said, "You see, this is why we found you. You were never meant to be forgotten." The woman added, "One day the world will thank you for the story you carry." As the years rolled by, the triplets became known far beyond their town. The musicians' songs reached radio stations. The athlete's name appeared in newspapers, and the artist's paintings were displayed in cities they had never imagined visiting. They still lived simply, still leaned on each other, but their lives were no longer defined by abandonment. Instead, they were defined by resilience and talent. What touched people most was not just their individual success, but their bond. No matter how far they went, they remained together. When the musician played on stage, his siblings sat in the front row cheering. When the athlete ran a race, his brother and sister were waiting at the finish line. When the artist unveiled a painting, her siblings stood beside her explaining the stories hidden in her colors. They never let success separate them. Their strength had always come from being three, and that never changed. The townspeople who once whispered about the abandoned babies now spoke with pride. Those triplets, they came from nothing, and look at them now. Even those who once pitied them began to respect them. Strangers found inspiration in their journey, seeing in them a reminder that no beginning is too broken to rise from. But through it all, the triplets remained humble. They never forgot the orphanage walls, the empty nights, or the cruel words. Instead of bitterness, they carried gratitude. They often returned to the orphanage, bringing supplies, music, and encouragement to children who felt forgotten. They would sit with the little ones, telling them, "We were once like you. If we can rise, so can you." The transformation over time was not just about fame or recognition. It was about healing. The scars of their past didn't vanish, but they no longer defined them. They had turned pain into art, hunger into strength, and loneliness into compassion. They had rewritten their destiny with their own hands, and as they stood at the edge of adulthood, successful in their own ways but still together, they realized something powerful. Being abandoned had not been the end of their story. It had been the beginning of a journey that made them who they were. 15 years had passed since that freezing winter morning, when 3 helpless babies were left outside the hospital door. What began as a tragedy had now turned into a story that people all over spoke about with awe. The once abandoned triplets were no longer children hiding in the shadows. They had become living proof that resilience, love, and unity could overcome even the coldest beginnings. The stunning reveal of their lives came not in one single moment, but in a series of events that brought their names into the light. The musician stood on a stage, lights shining down on him, the same boy who once strummed a broken guitar for coins on the street. Now his songs filled entire halls, his voice carrying stories of pain, hope, and healing. The audience sat in silence, some with tears in their eyes, as his melodies touched the hidden corners of their hearts. When he finished, the crowd rose to their feet, clapping until the hall echoed. He smiled, but not because of fame, because in that applause, he heard the world finally saying, "We see you." The athlete, meanwhile, sprinted across a stadium filled with roaring voices. The gun fired, and his legs carried him like the wind, each step faster than the last. For years he had run barefoot, mocked for dreaming too big. But now he wore real shoes, a uniform with his name on it, and a heart filled with fire. He crossed the finish line ahead of all others, his chest heaving, his arms raised in victory. The crowd chanted his name, and for a moment he wasn't an abandoned child anymore. He was a champion. The artist revealed her stunning transformation through colors and brushstrokes. In a bright gallery filled with paintings, people stood silently in front of her work. Her art wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. One painting showed 3 small babies wrapped in thin cloth under the snow. Another showed 3 older children holding hands in a crowded orphanage, and another showed 3 young adults, standing tall against the horizon, strong and unbroken. People stared, realizing the story behind the paintings, feeling the emotions pour out of the canvas. Critics praised her, collectors offered to buy her work, but to her, the greatest reward was seeing strangers touched by the story of survival captured in her colors. Together, the triplets stunned the world not only with their talents but with their bond. They never forgot where they came from, and they never walked alone. No matter how successful they became, they always stood side by side. When one shined, the others were there in the light too. Their greatest strength was not music, running, or painting, it was their unity. The reveal reached beyond their personal achievements. News outlets began sharing their journey, calling them the charming triplets who defied destiny. Journalists came to interview them, eager to know how children abandoned in the cold had risen to such heights. And whenever they were asked what kept them going, their answer was simple. We had nothing, but we had each other. That was enough. The most powerful moment came when they returned to the very orphanage where they grew up. The building looked smaller now, the paint still peeling, the playground still rusted. Children gathered around, their faces filled with curiosity and hope. The triplets stood before them, no longer the small, hungry children who once slept on those same beds, but role models who carried proof that life could change. They brought gifts, new shoes, art supplies, instruments, books, but more importantly, they brought words. The musician played a song for the children, soft and full of promise. The athlete ran with them across the dusty playground, laughing as they tried to keep up. The artist sat with the youngest children, teaching them how to draw their dreams on paper. And when the children asked, "How did you survive when the world was so cruel?" the triplets answered gently, "Because we never let go of each other. Because even when we had nothing, we believed tomorrow could be better." The staff, some of whom still remembered finding the babies 15 years ago, watched with tears in their eyes. They had once called them the charming triplets. Now they were more than charming, they were living miracles. Their story spread far and wide, reaching people who had never even heard of the small town where it began. Strangers wrote letters, saying how inspired they were, how the triplets gave them hope in their own struggles. And so, the children who had once been left behind in the cold had become a symbol for millions, a reminder that no matter how broken your beginning, your ending can still be beautiful. 15 years ago, they were just 3 abandoned babies, fragile and forgotten. But now, standing tall, they were proof that destiny is not written at birth. It is shaped by courage, love, and the refusal to give up. Their stunning reveal was not just in how they looked, but in who they had become. Survivors, dreamers, creators, and above all, family.